the question that I get is like, I want to grow my list by 5,000 people. Can you do that? Well, I don't know. Can you? Like,
yeah. Can you?
What is in place and can be augmented or made better to do that? Or rather, the answer really is, well, you can build marketing campaigns to build your list. Whether it will build it to 5,000 people in a set of time, in a set amount of time is yet to be seen. That's just reality. Like,
right. Well, and it completely depends on the artist investment.
Right.
This stuff isn't like, you can't set an objective without the support structure,
Right.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am Corrin Campbell. With me is Jack McCarthy, and today we are welcoming you into 2021, and I'm pretty stoked about it.
Yes! Welcome to 2021.
Yeah, the year that is perfect, except it's not.
No. Nope.
What do you know? We woke up and I don't know, but one thing that we can be doing is basically thinking about how we're going to deal with this year. And, one thing that I have really been inspired by, and I know Jack is actually the one who brought this idea to me for this episode, is thinking about, okay, if you have a whole year in front of you, obviously you don't want to get overwhelmed. We've talked a lot in the past about, figuring out how to plan things in chunks so you don't get overwhelmed. And, really what that means is that you need to be planning back from something, right? If you're trying to plan forward, you may not hit your deadlines, you may not hit your goals, and so sometimes, especially if you're planning a release of any kind or some big project, you want to plan back from the day that is a goal. And if you run long, forgive yourself. But I think we want to kind of talk about that a little bit and discuss some of the objectives that go along with that. So, Jack, I'm stoked on this. You ready? I feel like you're inspired.
I am inspired. I think this is a really fun and important topic. It's helpful to talk about this at, the beginning of a year. Not that you necessarily need to reset at the beginning of a year, but it's a good time when that's kind of happening in the consciousness of the world, certainly for right now, especially this year. But it is kind of a good time to take stock of what you're looking to do and, work your way backwards from there. And also, I think it's really helpful to, figure out what puzzle pieces fit into every step of the way towards reaching your goals. And that way you have clarity on what's doing what,
Yeah, exactly. I think it can be really easy to kind of have this thing out in the ether, and you're like, okay, I want to do this, but how am I going to, what am I going to achieve exactly with that, And we talk about this a lot of especially me and my Spotify kick, I'm constantly, okay, people are like, I want to grow my Spotify. And it's like, okay, but why, right? Do you know why? Is it because you want a certain number on Spotify? And then what does that serve? And I think that's really something that if you want to make sure you're following through for a release or for a goal or some, you need to know what your objective is. And when you have that objective, what is the result that's actually giving you, Because if you set an objective that's too close and you don't know the follow through, then, it's not really a complete plan. So I'm stoked to dig into this. Jack, you were the one who started with this, so why don't you kick us off with some great starting point?
Sure. So I think the big reason that this topic and this idea generated in my mind was a question that we see a lot in our community, in the indies community, is, when looking at advertising campaigns in particular, that's where this kind of idea germinated for me, was I've seen a lot of people ask questions like, oh, well, I'm running a fan finder and yeah, it's building up an audience for me, which is great, but it's not doing X, Y, Z. And to me, that's a question that kind of shows it just puts on display what we're talking about here. Like a fan finder campaign isn't really meant to do that XYZ that is leading the question, you know? It's meant to build you. It's meant to build you a warm audience. That's the role that it's playing in your marketing at the time when you're running that advertising campaign. So that's why I thought that this would be a kind of a helpful baseline starting point to talk about. Like when you're working backwards from a bigger goal, then you can fill in like, okay, well, like what is each step to get me to where I want to go, and what marketing campaigns or marketing systems fit into, you know, those steps, and what purpose do they all serve? So I think that's a kind of a good primer for, you know, why we wanted to talk about this. So hopefully that's a solid starting off point. It's like, look at the campaigns that you're running, whether they be advertising campaigns within a larger marketing campaign, because, you know, marketing campaigns don't solely live in ad land.
Right.
I think people get that lingo mixed up when we talk about campaigns. We're not just talking about ad campaigns. I mean, a lot of the times that's a big part of it, but it's not the only part of it.
Right. And I remember we touched on this in our hot seat episodes last year. Month.
Yeah.
But, you know, one thing we talked about was with a fan finder, a video view campaign, you don't want to just put it up and have it running forever, right? It's better to do it in a, you know, shorter period of time and with a clear objective on the back, like what's the follow-up, you know? And so I would say that a fan finder is very similar and not in some ways to running traffic to Spotify. Is right. Okay. You know, you're getting some exposure in theory, right? And you're gathering new listeners and you're finding people who are interested in your stuff, but you're then just kind of trusting that they will then do something, you know?
Right.
And really, even though you can gather data from a fan finder video, and you can't really gather a lot of data from Spotify campaigns, you know, even if you're using a bridge page, consumption isn't measured, you know. But nonetheless, if you don't have something on the backside of a fan finder, it's really not that much better in my mind, unless you go shore it up and do something with it. So that's why I think it's a really great idea to kind of think like, all right, what do I want to accomplish, and what are the steps that I need to take, maybe starting with a fan finder to get to that point. So, Jack, what do you think, you know, if say someone is starting out and they haven't done a ton of advertising, maybe they've run a fan finder, but they haven't done a whole bunch of things. What do you think is a reasonable objective for them if they're like, okay, I want to start? Where do they then go with that?
So that's actually I think that's like the best jumping off point for me and you to talk about here, because I think that's where most people get hung up.
Right.
Is like, what do I do with my fan finder? Do I send people to an opt-in page to get them to sign up for my list? What do I do once that happens? Do I try to make sales? You know, what do I do? Period. I think that's where a lot of people get hung up oftentimes. I don't often see that happen with artists that have an established fan base. When they're running fan finder traffic, for example, they in most cases have a number of things going on that are going to be happening ahead of that, whether that's, you know, promotional related things with more music dropping or more content being released, or they're going to be trying to sell on the back end in some way. But it's usually with artists who are just kind of starting out and trying to figure out what to do, what to do zoomed out 30,000 foot view, that this question comes up. So I think what I would probably do at this stage is like, look at what you have in front of you. Like before you started running a fan finder or even thinking about running a fan finder, you probably or likely, hopefully have, you know, music in the backlog that you're looking to release for the first time. Maybe you've been, you know, working on singles, you've been working on recording an album. You've got something that you've been working towards creatively that you can then start to market. And the fan finder is kind of the first step in finding the people, building the awareness around, whatever you've got happening over the next few months. So I think my recommendation would be look at what's in front of you and then decide on how that's going to be released. Something Cirque and I were talking about, and he's been, pretty public about this as well, is, his real plan right now is for audience generation with the goal of, having a fan base that he can expose his content to. That's really the goal. So he's dripping out content over the next year, and really that's his objective, to build awareness with one marketing asset, his fan finder, to then have an audience to show his newer releases to. It's not towards monetization. It's not even really towards list building. The objective of the fan finder is build a fan base, build an engaged listener base, I should say. I think that's probably a more accurate description of it. And then piggyback off of that, the next step is, okay, well, what is my rollout plan for my next single, my next video, the video after that, the single after that, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great example, right? Because so many of our conversations are about, getting these sales, like having marketing promos and getting that email list big and whatever. And for some people listening to this podcast, they're like, okay, I get it, but also like, I'm not even close,
Yeah.
And so, I do want to highlight that there are objectives that do not necessarily have to do with those types of conversions, with generating leads, with generating sales. You may not be in a place where that is reasonable for you. So that doesn't mean that you should run a fan finder without an objective, right? And so even if Circa is not currently, running campaigns to necessarily get information from these people or get, basically it's for eyeballs, he still has a data plan, right? Like he's still gathering them, he's following up with them, he's posting, but also making sure that those users are seeing this content so that he can slowly become omnipresent for them. And when he does get to a point where he's releasing music, or does get to a point where he can gather emails or wants to start making sales, he's been nurturing these people along the way. And I think that is still a viable objective. And, if you've listened to us for a long time, maybe you got the impression that it's not. But it is. Like, as long as you have that plan and you're doing that on purpose, that's viable.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's really important to point out. That was kind of one of the big things that I wanted to highlight here is like, you don't necessarily have to have right away the plan in place to run a fan finder, run an opt-in campaign, make a sales offer right then and there. That doesn't have to be your rollout, If your plan is just, I want to release music and have a fan base, a listener base, an audience to hear it, to see it, or to possibly hear it and see it and consume it, then a fan finder can be a great, front end to that effort as well. But I think that's something that a lot of people, at least in my opinion, seem to struggle with, is knowing the place where that fits in, Yeah,
absolutely. And something, if you've been in our training area or, if you're an Indie Pro member or if you've ever purchased our Ultimate Album Launch training, there's a lot of coverage on basically how to take your fan finder audience and set them down this huge path. And I know that there are some indies that do not have success with that. They do not automatically, whether it's because of their audience, because of their content, there's a million reasons why that might not work. And it is a great one fell swoop kind of strategy, but not every artist is going to make that work. And so this is something where it's like, okay, let me get to the middle of that, and that's why I think I really wanted to kind of clarify and communicate that, is that the Ultimate Album Launch is very cool in that it gets opt-ins, it gets, it covers your nurturing, it covers maybe making sales on the back end of that, right? But if you've tried that and it's not successful, like you didn't fail, right? Your people just need to go through something different. And it's not the only way to do something. Maybe you don't even want to try it. Maybe you don't even want to try and fail at that. Maybe you just want to do a part way, and just build that audience so that it's easier for you later. It really depends on how much you need to try to recoup your expenses for advertising. So that's why saving up advertising just so that you can do finding new fans and nurturing them until you're ready, if you can make that investment, that might be smarter for you.
Yeah, for sure. I think when taking the approach of, sort of a longer play here of, I'm looking at maybe releasing 6 singles over the course of a year or 6 months or whatever it might be, and knowing I need to use advertising to generate awareness for that as it's happening, with each release maybe, or have a steady fan finder that I can run as a front end piece of content for retargeting. I think that's where, you just become a little bit more realistic about what your budgeting is, knowing that like monetization isn't part of the strategy, you're just clear with yourself. And I think that's an important part of objective setting and expectation setting.
Right.
Is like, I know that I'm not going to try to monetize right now. I'm working primarily in like introduction and education, and that's fine and cool. And plenty of artists do it. Plenty of artists slave away doing it, hand to hand, just trying to get like social awareness and maybe go viral. Like they might not necessarily spend their money, but they certainly spend their well-earned pocket change and time doing that,
Yeah. Oh, totally. I'm always commenting on that. The amount of times that we get pushback on, some of the things that we share, especially organic. And they're like, oh, I can't learn all that. But, the amount of time they learn how to, find curators for Spotify, I'm like, well, you could probably do some of each, and really be diversifying your investment of time, So, for example, with Circa and the kinds of objectives that he has, let's talk about objectives with a different definition, right? What kind of ads and efforts do you see, especially like if we are advertising, right? We use objectives, which is a little different. Campaign objectives for advertising is different, but it's the same word. So let's talk about it. So what kinds of campaigns and objectives would you be looking at in an advertising sense?
Sure. So if in a setting where someone's, trying to get awareness and then be releasing content regularly, is that?
Yeah. For an artist in that position. On
that same track. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think a couple things. Let's make some broad assumptions here that you've got, well-recorded music coming out, video content to go along with it, and, a content calendar planned out. Kind of like those are kind of like the 3 assumptions that I'm going to make from a strategic level that you're going to be doing if you're planning, this kind of year with your marketing.
Right.
You need all of those things, right? Those are kind of like non-negotiables in my opinion. Maybe not videos for each and every song, but, at least a handful of videos that can have traffic run on them, and certainly a decent amount of content. You can't be doing this and then just go ghost on social.
Right,
right. That won't work for you. But making that assumption clear, I think the kinds of ad campaigns that you're going to look to be running are, 1, video views, a video views objective campaign for like a leading fan finder, and also other fan finder tests, not kind of resting on your laurels, trying to find an asset that works really well, and gets listeners at the most affordable cost. That would kind of be like step number 1. I think a post-engagement campaign for greenlight warmth boosting of the content that you're releasing over time. So not only singles as they're dropping, but also any content that you're releasing related to it. So, post on social, post on Instagram, having a, kind of like an ad repository that you can just swap post in and out of, extend their reach, get that content in front of the people that you're, kind of scooping up in the first level. That would be another one. I think it also might be useful to have a reach campaign in place, or a secondary video views campaign, depending on the sizes of those audiences.
Right.
You might want to look into having like a follow-up fan finder kind of video in place. That can be really cool. Just another way to sort of indoctrinate people into who you are. So maybe you're, a few tracks into a release cycle. And when I say a release cycle, I mean like singles being released. you could, have your lead fan finder and then a follow-up as a retargeting ad. That can be really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think traffic campaigns, traffic over to Spotify or Apple Music or wherever people stream music. If that's something that you're trying to get, some additional life into, having a traffic campaign in place for that is another good way to sort of tap into it. So those are kind of like the main four that I would look at.
Nice. One thing, I love running reach campaign. Like it may not be a good, you can tell me, Jack, if this is bad advice. No, actually, this is not advice. Let me phrase it that way. This is not advice. This is just something that I like to do because I'm me. And if you've been listening to this podcast for very long, you know that I don't necessarily follow the Entrepreneur Playbook all the time. But I love reach campaigns, and I love using reach campaigns with all kinds of different objectives, so to speak, right? The campaign objective, as far as Facebook is concerned, is reach. But I run, campaigns for sales retargeting. I run it for just general engagement. I run it for like messenger ads, kind of like where I've got ref URLs in there, or it's a click to my website that then opens a messenger. And I'll use a reach campaign for all kinds of stuff, and then make an audience of anything trackable that happens on that ad. Because when Facebook optimizes for a certain objective, it's going to, kind of skew the audience or, identify people who are going to take that action, right? Yep. So if a huge fan of yours just doesn't click on ads, they're not into it, when you optimize for traffic, they may not see that ad, right. Where it would be super valuable if there was no objective and all it was putting out there was the eyeballs, right? Which is what reach is. Then they did click through and they opted into something or they took some action from that. It kind of indicates an even deeper intent, right? In that they will take an action even if it wasn't something they would normally do. So I like doing reach campaigns for that because it sometimes can give me a really good indicator of, especially if it's a specific action that I'm only running in that reach campaign and it's not something that I have to try to infer which campaign is doing better with that action or whatever. I love doing that because then I can kind of filter the people who are going to do things just because they like me and not because it's in their Facebook behavior pattern.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think
so that can be a fun experiment.
I think that's an interesting play. Like you're kind of bypassing the machine learning of like who in my audience is going to click or who in my audience is going to convert or watch or whatever the objective or engage, in terms of like a post engagement kind of campaign. This is just like, I want my fans to see this content, period.
Right. And if they take action, it indicates something.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, this is definitely something that, if you're running for reach, and actually a lot of these campaigns, right, you have to make sure that it's something that you're willing to, like, not get any of the, like, second, third level results that you're hoping will happen, right? You have to be okay with the fact that this is just going to be money gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And be okay with that, but as long as you're doing other things elsewhere, or if you are trying to, get your finger on the pulse of the fans who will just do things because they love you and not because it's just the way they behave on Facebook, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that was kind of one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about all of this on this episode was like understanding when and why those second and third level results that you might be looking for in an ad campaign aren't really like when those aren't appropriate to be looking for,
Right. Yeah.
Because that, I think that that's an assumption that a lot of people incorrectly make about running ads is like, we've certainly had cases where actually I did an IndieX consult probably 2 years ago now with an artist who had been running just Fan Finder for like a year and was certainly doing like they were releasing music and they were posting a lot and stuff like that, and they had profited pretty heavily on just Fan Finder, which is wild. And we had the conversation. Wow. Yeah. And we had the conversation and I was like, you know, I mean, that's wild that you profited on Fan Finder, because that's not really the point. Like, not that it's not the point long term, of course, like, you know, your business is supposed to profit, but like that advertising campaign's objective was not profit. So
right.
When talking about that, you know, like and talking about all of this, like that was kind of my thinking behind this conversation, was looking at a Fan Finder and saying like, well, okay, I've got a lot of views and like my 75% view cost is this, and I've got a lot of engaged fans, and look, like there's buzz and activity happening, but when does the profit happen? Well, or when does the revenue happen rather? Well, that's not a second or secondary or tertiary KPI at all, you know, and
right.
learning how to determine what those are for, you know, the various steps of your marketing, I think is probably a skill that we don't talk about nearly enough.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I think it could be really easy to assume that if you're looking to get emails, if you're looking to build your mailing list, the way to do that is to run a campaign for lead or opt-in conversions, right? And, you know, obviously that's covered in our Ultimate Album Launch training. But, you know, that's not necessarily true, right? There are other ways to kind of help that happen without having to run a campaign that is for that, you know, conversion objective. And so that is important, I think, because we do very frequently talk about objectives for campaigns, and then, you know, with the expectation that that is the purpose, you know, for which you are running that ad. And that's the only way to get that result, you know, and obviously that's just not the case. So, but what we want to make sure is that you aren't assuming that some second or third level thing will happen without having some kind of system in place by which to do it, right?
Totally, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really good thing to highlight.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and going back to our example of like an artist who's going to primarily be running, you know, top of funnel for awareness and releasing music steadily over the course of 2021, let's say, you know, building up an email list is a part of that goal, but they don't necessarily have plans to put together an album launch experience or a dedicated bribe that they'll advertise to. There's no reason that you can't have that somewhere in your marketing stack. And I talk about that in one of the lessons in the Grow Your Permission List training, is like, yes, ads are one place that you can, you know, get leads. And certainly once you have like a critical mass of warm audience that you can retarget, like, sure, of course you can do that. It's a really powerful way to do so. But if it's not, it doesn't have to be a primary part of your strategy right then and there. That said, you should have that somewhere in your, if you're in the category of person that we're talking about here, the situation of, you know, releasing music consistently, and that's kind of your space. Have a bribe somewhere, right, in your stack, whether it's living on your Facebook page or living on your website, living in ManyChat, whatever it might be. It could be, you know, even hand to hand, where you're just chatting with fans and, you know, giving them the opportunity once you're talking with them in Messenger or whatever, or DMs on Instagram, wherever it might be, to opt into your list. Like, have something like that in there, even if you're not actively or as actively using it with advertising. Right. I think that, you know, that just drives you towards, you know, a potentially even larger goal once you kind of, emerge from your, you know, your first plan, your first objective.
Yeah, I agree. So what if I think we've covered that. You think we've got enough out there for those artists?
I hope so. I hope that really makes it clear.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So why don't we move to the next, you know, kind of tier? You know, I know that you work with grassroots artists at IndieX sometimes, right? The lucky ones.
Yeah. Yep.
So what would you consider the next tier where the objectives start to shift?
Sure. So I think the next tier where the objectives start to shift are the types of artists that they've got listener generation happening one way or another, whether it's from running ads or, maybe they've just had some massive organic exposure or just large. I won't even use the word.
Or they're blowing up on Spotify.
Yeah, maybe they're blowing up on Spotify. Maybe they had like a viral video on wherever. Doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, we know somebody who's had a viral TikTok and their Spotify blew up.
Yeah, that we do.
And it's actually an Indepreneur employee. And when it happened, I was like, oh, come on, man. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
We tell people that's not going to work. But it did,
Yeah. Wild. But let's say you're in that place and, you're probably still planning to release music. I would hope you're in this to make music.
Right.
And that's still part of the goal. But let's say you have that, that kind of front end happening, to some degree on its own, through your efforts. And you've also got, list building happening. So you're already in a place where your email list is being built up and continues to grow. I think sort of the next tier is, okay, well, how do I make that happen faster? And what am I doing with those people that are coming onto my list? Am I making sure that they're taking a next step? And what does that next step look like, depending on what you're doing? Is it, being aware of releases that are happening? Is it going through, is it teeing them up for a launch of a bigger project, whether that be a record or a movie or a documentary? It could be anything really. Or it could be merchandise, sales offers, things like that. So I think that's kind of the next tier of things is like, if you've got those first two pieces on lock or happening rather, the next step is deciding and determining what's the objective that you want to set for moving people kind of to the next stage of relationship with you, getting into buddy system stuff. Now, how do you get them over the hurdle of, deeper engagement, whether that's, hopefully that's a purchase, monetization.
Right. Yeah, that would be the goal. So what do you think are some good ways? Let's go with organic first. Say someone's on the list, right? What are some good organic campaigns? And I'm asking you this because obviously, you have a training in the Indie Pro area that's about exactly this. There's obviously a difference between creating a great bribe, right, which is how you get people on the list in the first place, and then what you do with them when they're in there. And so what are some elevation techniques that you would recommend for an artist that's kind of in this middle tier? Sure.
So a couple things. Let's say you are kind of at we're talking about the first half of this level, this middle tier.
Right. Right.
You've got audience generation happening, right? So I think ensuring that your bribe is really as strong as you think it is. It's something that we see often at IndieX, especially when onboarding new artists into the agency, is they might have email list generation going, list building, but a lot of times the bribe that it's associated around is kind of weak. A lot of times it's just like a free download and that's it. And there's not really a whole lot of engagement going on afterwards. Sometimes we see it even hand-to-hand communication with no follow-up. I'll add you to this list and you'll be in the loop about my new music, and then they don't hear anything. So I think at that stage, it's like, if you've got audience building happening and you've got list building happening, looking at, well, why aren't people taking a next step with you on their own? Is it because they're not being... are they not being made an offer? Is there no opportunity for them to do that? I think that's where you should set your sights in terms of an objective, is like, how do I pull out a way for people to kind of take this step themselves? And then for those that don't, I can plan into my marketing ways to, entice them to do so. Right. And it's interesting because I have struggled. Well, okay. One of my problems of all of the problems that I have about myself in my music career is that I get too hype on something. And, I may have this, complex, great automation running. And I do this with ad campaigns too, actually, where an ad campaign is doing just fine.
And then I'm like, but wouldn't it be cool if I did this too? And then I'll make another one and like change the titles of different things to be like, okay, and this one delete on this day. And oh my gosh. Yeah. But like in my, in some of my automations I have running, I've got like, tags that I'm filtering people out for specific content. And I've talked before about this like super, not signature, but this super footer really, that uses tags to filter if people are in my Facebook group, if they are in my membership, if they've already been through the gilding experience, like all of these things that are available for them to do for free. And then there's also like a paid item in there. And so, I keep thinking of new things. So as I am building more and more stuff into my workflow, and more assets, CC points, and now I'm building my SMS stuff. I keep going through and adding, people to these like bridge workflows, which I know Jack has seen this because he's been in my drip account.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But basically it's like, all right, so after they, get this, then it waits a week and it invites them to the Facebook group if they're not in there. And then it waits 7 days and invites them to the membership if they're not there. And then after that, it invites them to Superphone. And so I went through and I added about 1,000, I think it was about 1,100 people who had not been through these great ideas I had that I wanted to add. And they had not been invited to the Facebook group. I'd only sent broadcasts about the Facebook group. And so if anyone came in or, didn't qualify for that broadcast for whatever reason, they'd never been invited. And I sent out an email to these 1,100, I added those 1,100 people to this workflow and they were invited. And I had 145 member requests 6 hours later.
Wild. Yeah.
Which was kind of a nightmare, actually, because I only allow people in the Facebook group if I have their email address, which means I have to verify every single one of them. And I was like, I didn't think this through. But it's amazing what people will do if you just tell them that something is available, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so even though it's a terrible thing that I am constantly trying to like find new free things that are fun that they can be a part of, it does go to show that it's really simple. And, that's over, that was almost 15% converted from receiving an invite in an email to going into the Facebook group and requesting. So that's pretty remarkable. And I think it kind of illustrates like all you got to do is offer, and people will take action.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's an interesting case study of like, what was your objective in doing that? Your objective was deeper engagement. It wasn't necessarily conversion in terms of sales. It was, I want them to sign up. I want them to join this group so that I can hang out with them, so that they can hang out with me somewhere else. That's like, a deeper nurturing education stage kind of objective. A little bit deeper than just like engage with your content, which is cool. And the reason I mention that is like, I think a lot of times when people think about like what to do with an email list, it's like, oh, well, I send them new music and like I try to make sales. But like,
right.
This is a great example of like, yeah, I just wanted them to be active. I just needed to activate them towards something else. That was your objective of that kind of campaign. Similar sort of thing happened 2 weeks ago, actually, with one of our IndieX artists, Dave Pettigrew. We were doing a little free trial of his membership, a trial membership tier. And he just wanted to try it out to see, like, are there people hanging out in my audience that know about what we're doing and, might want to take it for a test spin for 10 days or whatever it was. And so we sent an email out to his list, set up a dedicated tier in the membership, an automation to go along with it, sent out the email, and like right away, like 10 people signed up for this free trial and just are going through the content and engaging with it. And now they're kind of like getting their feet wet in his member area, which is, a clear path towards this, in this case, towards ascension. Totally. Because if they dig it and they really like it, then they're probably going to come on as a monthly member. that same kind of thing happened right there. And it was just one of those sort of areas of opportunity that we weren't trying. So my point is, looking for areas that you can sort of iterate on or just get creative with is a good kind of place in this second tier to be getting your fingers into.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, actually. And this is where I want to kind of talk about backplanning, right? Because you can only really plan if you get too far out there. If you're like, okay, when I'm as big as John Legend, my best fans are going to look like this, and then backplan from there. That's not achievable. So don't do that. But what you can do is say, okay, depending on where things are right now, like I'm making this much revenue a month and I'd like to be making this much, or I have this many customers and I'd like to have this many, or I have this size mailing list and only 2% of those are purchasers and I'd like to get to 10% of them being purchasers, or something like that.
Yeah.
So when you have those kinds of goals, you can kind of, identify what the avatar of that person looks like, right? What are the things that they have done? What are the things that are set up within your artistry, and kind of rank them, by what the engagement level is. Like for me, there's obviously people who have viewed my content. And then really the next step ends up being the mailing list, right? And then, well, actually, no, the first one would probably be CC points.
CC points, I was going to say.
Yeah, because it doesn't require an email, but it does gather an email. So it's kind of triggering the next step, right? So CC Points is a mini chat bot where people can rack up points and they get a free prize. And I send it to them in snail mail, send them a nice little surprise. I'm not going to talk about it in case any of them are listening. They're not. So I'll send them a little prize. And then I gather their email in that process, and I gather their SMS in that process if they want those points. I gather their location if they want those points. But if they don't want to participate in any of that, they don't have to. I get their streaming service, I get their Instagram handle, and I get all of this information that allows me to then do something else with that information, right?
Yeah.
So that really is the first thing. So since I am gathering emails, that's kind of the next step. And that, the mailing list, that's an obvious objective. That would be the next depth for me. The next depth after that is the Gilded experience, which, some people will put in their email and then start the Gilded experience. And some of them who are already on the mailing list will click what Drip calls a trigger link, and it will automatically add them to the Gilded experience. And they may go through that. At the end of the Gilded experience, there is a purchase offer, but that's not necessarily the objective of the Gilded experience. That is just getting to know me. There's a lot of personal video in there. There's a lot of personal details. It's very vulnerable. And so it, makes that deeper. The next step after that, essentially, is the Facebook group, because the Facebook group is filtered by email users, right? So that is actually a deeper portion, which is a little different from how some people use Facebook groups. But I use mine in that way simply because it's actually easier to appear in someone's newsfeed through a group than it is to appear in their inbox. So I would rather send people email first and then have some deeper stuff for Facebook. Also, a lot of the activity that happens on Facebook is more trackable than email. So that's why I prioritize it in that way.
I don't know about you, but my personal news feed on Facebook is like filled with groups, all the groups that I'm in.
All the groups.
So, more so than anything else. So great point there. Facebook groups for the win.
Yeah, absolutely. But when they join the Facebook group and I have their email because they put it in, I add a tag, and then it sends them an email that's like, hey, introduce yourself, tell everybody about yourself. What songs do you like? Did you get some merch? Post a picture of that, And what that does is it makes that Facebook group active, which is really the trigger to be getting it into these news feeds, right? If your group sits inactive, that's not going to be a thing. So, and then there's customers, and then there's the membership, right? So now I'm kind of switching it around soon because the Gilded experience is actually going to be housed inside my member area. So I'm going to be pulling a Dave Pettigrew where I'm like, look, you can get all of this stuff. Here's the Gilded experience, but it also is in the membership site where I have my own little, almost like banner ads, right, that are saying like, hey, you can upgrade and get these things,
Yep.
And so pretty soon these things all start to feed each other. So if I want to set a goal, I need to look at what steps someone needs to go through to get there. And you need to do the same thing. And maybe what you'll identify when you're doing that back planning, first off, that gives you a set of objectives, right? Like if I had this all planned out, but I didn't have anyone on my mailing list, obviously the whole process would be bottlenecked by that,
Yeah.
So I would need to identify the objectives that I need to achieve to get to this membership level, which I don't know if that's something you would accomplish in a single year, but just as an example. And so when you back plan from what that person looks like for me, having a member, right, would be someone who had joined the mailing list, has CC points, went through the Gilded experience, right? And so I can plan all of those different objectives. And so I think that's a good thing for, in 2021 is set these goals, right? Identify what you want your community to look like at the end of this year, and then back plan and chunk it into objectives. And when you do that, you will keep focus. And you can kind of see okay, what are the things that happen between this step and this step? Is it organic? Is it paid, right? A lot of this progression that I have set up is organic, but I have paid campaign support of it as well. So that people are seeing ads that are cheeky and is just look, I'm going to come in your newsfeed and let you know, here's this free thing. Because it's going to serve an objective of what that end avatar looks like, which is a recurring monthly member. And that, we all want that. So.
You raised such a good point about one, breaking down your goals into, or breaking down, you basically breaking down your goals and objectives into things that are manageable and not just I want to make $1 million or I want everyone to be a member of my membership site. I think that's super, super important. One thing that comes to my mind is at this second tier, one of the biggest questions that I get, especially when it comes to having IndieX consults, and it's a challenging question because I don't really think it can be answered super well. And it, honestly, oftentimes when this question gets asked in a certain way, it kind of disqualifies someone in my mind as an agency client. That sounds harsh, but that's kind of how I feel about it. I've had conversations where someone's well, my goal is to, I want to grow my email list by 5,000 people or something like that. I'll see that as an objective or a goal on their application,
right.
or in a conversation. But if you don't have anything going on to do that, if, let's say you don't have listener generation really happening, or you do, but you don't have a bribe in place or multiple bribes in place or a bribe that's really working, well, then, the question that I get is I want to grow my list by 5,000 people. Can you do that? Well, I don't know. Can you?
Can you?
What is in place and can be augmented or made better to do that? Or rather, the answer really is, well, you can build marketing campaigns to build your list, whether it will build it to 5,000 people in a set of time, in a set amount of time is yet to be seen. That's just reality.
Right. Well, and it completely depends on the artist investment.
Right.
This stuff isn't you can't set an objective without the support structure,
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's something that is clearly identified in all of our, our internal case studies of success stories, is that it really requires artist involvement, and it really requires a lot of mid steps, baby steps in between one phase and another. And assuming that you can, again, going back to Ultimate Album Launch, this is meant to be a machine that helps you go from this, and it's a very direct line. That doesn't work for everybody. And even if it does work, you probably should want to have other things in there. Even if you get those first purchasers through this launch, you're still going to have to continue nurturing them and doing all these other things so that they care beyond that moment. You can have purchasers that never care about you again. That is totally feasible.
That's something we talked about when we unpacked your pay what you want funnel, is like, if you don't have the support structure to do this, you should not try to do this at scale, you know?
Right, absolutely. Because really that purchase, you know, I know that we tout customers and revenue as kind of your goal, right? The primary goal. And it can be easy to skew that into meaning that once someone becomes a customer, you're good, you know?
Yeah.
And that just isn't true. Like, you know, is as much as you want to have consistent representation on social, like a lot of people understand that. A lot of musicians get that. Constant content creation and constant, you know, communication and availability and vulnerability and all of these things, that still applies when someone makes a purchase, you know? Whether you're doing it the way that I had, which is, you know, through free plus shipping and handling, or whether you're doing that with people who have known you a long time. You can never take that for granted, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's definitely something that, you know, I hope that me kind of showing you mine, and I'm not some huge artist or anything, right? But I have a pretty solid structure. And so if you look at where on that spectrum you are, like maybe you're right with me, or maybe you're halfway through that, or maybe you're at the beginning, right? Hopefully some of those things are stuff that you're like, okay, what can I implement that fits with my brand that can step people through these different objectives? And by the end of 2021, hopefully hit this goal that I set. And I think it'll make your goals a lot more clear to you. And when you're talking about that chunking the whale thing, like maybe you're like, okay, I see the whale and I know that I need it to be in the chunks so that I can digest it. But like, how do I cut it? You know? I don't have a knife. So like, and where do I cut it? Right. I don't want all blubber, you know, and like, this is getting gross, but you know what I'm saying?
You're starting to sound like me
with your animal cruelty. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's sometimes, I hope that has illuminated some ways to cut up that whale and to make that that big project digestible, because sometimes it can be like, all right, I know I need to break it down, but I'm not sure how to break it down. And I hope that you know can inspire someone to figure out some ways to do that for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I also think like looking at it that way also helps you to slate like where your releases fit into that, you know, like you might be looking, you know, at your year and say like, you know, be saying in June, I know that I'm going to be releasing a record. So, you know, all of these people are going through all of these things based on what's happening in my marketing right now. So where and how do I want to plug my release into, you know, into my system, you know, not that it's a static system. This is exactly my point. It's not a static system. Where do you plug a release into that? Well, to your subscribers, you're going to want to make sure they're in the loop, and maybe you want to be nurturing them with content about the release beforehand, making them a dedicated offer at the end. And maybe that's before the project even drops. Maybe for the people who are in your warm audience, you know, maybe you are running an ultimate album launch kind of setup, leading into the record's release to build up your list some more. Maybe for, you know, customers, you're planning to launch very specific higher end merch around a release. And that's all kind of, you know, weaving in and out between May, June, July. You know, maybe all of a sudden that opens up your eyes to like where something on your calendar fits into, you know, your ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing. And I was talking to the IndieX guys about this because, you know, pending the world, my original plan for 2021 was to be touring in the fall, and releasing a new album just prior to that. And so I've been backplanning my 2021 with, you know, having it culminate in that place, is a partial European tour and a hopefully an East and West leg of a US tour. We'll have to see how things are booking as we get, further in the year. But I still have an album to record. So there's a release that needs to happen before that. There are objectives for the higher tiers of my membership, which are currently not open because I don't have studio content or album content to share with them, but they will open up once I'm in the studio. And I'm also going to, you guys know I test things, and I've never been a crowdfunding fan, but I'm going to test a crowdfunding because why not? you know, might as well test something so I can quit talking crap about it if it is great. So
or keep talking crap about it if it's not.
Exactly. Well, I will. I mean, I've run successful crowdfunding with other artists before. I've just never loved the appeal of it. I don't necessarily like it, but
didn't really want to do it for yourself.
Yeah, I just didn't. But at this point, I'm like, may as well try it. I have the funds if it doesn't work, so I'm not really too concerned about it. And I think that's more is that I don't like it as a lifeline. At least for myself, I don't want to.
God, I don't like it as a lifeline as an account manager.
Yeah, it's like a super risk. I just don't want to do that. I want to be able to deliver whatever it is that I am promising people, period.
For sure.
Even if we're crowdsourcing it. So, but all of that is backplanning, right? So everything you heard up until this point for my stuff was 2020, and 2020 worked out well, chunked it bit by bit, and now 2021. So, I think that's one good thing. And if a year is intimidating for you to look at what the end of the year would look like, especially because we're living in a flex world right now, then chunk it down to 6 months and see, what you can achieve in that. And then again, be forgiving on yourself if something takes longer than you thought, because that's okay. But I think identifying those objectives and knowing how that supports your music career. Again, we talk about revenue a lot, but that's really just because we want more musicians to be able to sustain their careers and eventually live off them. It's not necessarily because it's the most important thing. So if you're not at a place where generating customers is reasonable for you, just identify what objective is reasonable for you and pursue that.
Yeah, I think, and it's important to be realistic about that. That's kind of what I was getting at when I talked about like the things that disqualify or, make people not a right fit for IndieX is like, whacked expectations of what can be done, even when you have a team.
Right.
So yeah, I think like zooming out and being like, all right, well, like I'm not in a place where monetization is going to, really work sustainably or consistently rather, then what is? Yeah, and what can you be doing there to make that better and better? I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you mentioned like setting realistic goals. We've been working on a promotional calendar, sales promotion training to go inside Indie Pro, and it's in editing right now, which is really exciting. And yeah, I'm super pumped about it. That was kind of like my wrap up of December. And in one of the lessons in that, we walk through like what you need to do when planning out promotions on a calendar, month to month. And what we talk about is setting goals, and we talk about setting goals from, and I'm teasing this a little bit. I wasn't planning on this today, but what we talk about is like setting goals based on either or any of these things, either or any, based on product goals. So maybe you've got product that you want to move or new product coming in that you want to start selling, or old stuff on the shelves that you want to clear out. So it can be product related goals. It can be audience related goals. So maybe you're looking to engage old customers, for example, and get them buying for the first time in a while, or moving subscribers into customers. So moving through affirmation. Maybe it's about ascension, repeat customers. Maybe it's about, more massive ascension into membership. Those are audience related goals. And then we talk about revenue goals, looking at, maybe you're making $1,000 a month in your online store and you want to bump that up to 1,200 for the next month. So what kind of things do you need to be doing to do to hit any goals in any of those categories? That's something that we talk about in that specific lesson on, setting goals and planning your promotions or your marketing around that. But one of the things that you mentioned here that kind of caught my attention and related it back to this was overwhelm. And I said in the lesson, listen, don't look at this promo calendar and try to plan out all 12 months of promotions based on goals that you don't really know exist, because something might change in there. Plan out a quarter or just a couple months, especially for artists at the second and third tiers of kind of what we talked about today. If you're in a place where you're just kind of getting your feet wet with any of this stuff, just start to do it. That's one of the big, maybe that's my call to action, or my call to arms for 2021 is just start doing it, or just try it.
Yeah.
Because you can't really gauge how your people are going to respond to something until you really start doing it. So for example, when we run sales promos for clients at IndieX, especially ones who are just getting started with it, we run a promotion and we really just feel out all right, how did their fan base take to this? And based on that, how often should we run these? It's not schedule one every 2 weeks and do it that way no matter what happens. It's really it's a super fluid system. So anyway, I thought that was super relevant just to say, don't overwhelm yourself. Just kind of wander your way, go into it, put both feet in the water, but don't feel like you need to dive headfirst into planning out a whole year.
Right. And I think at that point, it's really important to make promises to yourself, but not make forward-facing promises, so that you can be forgiving on yourself. I think that's a mistake I see a lot of musicians make, and, even just normal people, promising and setting an expectation for people that you cannot deliver. So in order to be able to forgive yourself and be kind, to yourself, and do things the right way, just, have everything set up before you tell people about it. And then you can take your time to meet that objective in a smooth and correct running fashion.
Totally. It's great.
Yeah. Well, awesome, guys. I hope that this gets you hype for 2021. I know I'm hyped for 2021, and I'm really excited for what's going to be coming on Creative Juice this year. We're going to start mixing it up a little, I think. And, as much as I love our marketing chats, I also want to see if we can pivot around a little bit. And so again, I'm going to be kind to myself and not set your expectations just yet, but hopefully I'll have some cool things to share with you in the coming weeks. So thanks for hanging out with us. Yeah, we're going to have fun this year. We're going to make it fun, even if the world is still crazy. It's going to be a good time. So that's all for this episode of Creative Juice, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week on Creative Juice.
Peace out, Indies.
Can y'all really feel us? East Coast, feel us, West Coast.